Hello and welcome to a new series that I'm calling Serving Face and Historical Facts, a series where I attempt to serve face while talking about different historical subjects. And I thought to begin this series we'd go for perhaps the most famous family in British history, and that is the Tudor kings and queens. And if we're going to go in chronological order, then we are starting off with old Hazard VII himself. Interestingly, the 8th Henry to be crowned the King of England. He might be the least known Tudor monarch. You might know him as the dad of Henry VIII, or you might know that he ended the War of the Roses at Bosworth Fields, or you might know him as an Isa. But where did he get his start? So his mum actually gave birth to him when she was 13 years old. Now at the time it wasn't necessarily uncommon for girls to get married at like 13 years old, but it was more uncommon for them to give birth at 13 years old because frankly the child's body cannot handle it and the nobility likes having children. So she was giving birth incredibly young and it was a traumatic experience, and it meant that she couldn't have any more kids in the future after Henry. He was born in Pembroke Castle in 1457, and the fact that he was her only child from this noble family, it can help us contextualise why this young mum did the things that she did. Basically, Margaret Beaufort, who was Henry VII's dad, was incredibly pragmatic. So she gave birth to Henry. Her husband then died 3 months later, so she had to get remarried again. And actually she made a pretty good match with a lad named Henry Stafford. So during this time, it's the War of the Roses. The nobility is in complete disarray. Major powers were getting killed left, right and centre, which kind of meant that for a lot of young nobles, the crown was in their grasp, even though it really shouldn't have been if they were going through the, what's it called? That's it, primogeniture. Primogeniture kind of was a bit out of the window because that many young nobles were dying, dukes were dying, earls were dying. So Henry's dodgy claim came from his dad, who died soon after he was born, because his paternal granddad got with the widowed Catherine. She was queen, married to Henry V. All was going great. He died, and then she got with someone scandalously below her station, potentially a garden boy. I mean, the stories are a bit unknown exactly what happened, but that is the royal lineage and that is the royal claim, so it really was weak. It would take a whole episode on its own to go through exactly the state of the nobility and the War of the Roses, but we're trying to today keep it to contextualising Henry's reign and Henry's childhood. So his childhood was not great because war. His uncle called Jasper, he was constantly fleeing and having to go to France. He went like a comically large amount of times, and eventually Henry would have to too, because anyone that could be rallied behind as a potential pretender to the throne or that could potentially cause trouble for a king, they had to go. It was just the nature and the brutality of the period. But also during this time it's kind of hard to say which side Henry was on, because his mum, the one who was 13 when she gave birth to him, after her second husband died, who was a Yorkist, he died fighting for the Yorkist cause on the battlefield. His new stepdad was Thomas Stanley, who was an incredibly powerful Yorkist member. So when I say mess, I mean mess. However, during all of this, there were periods of more relative stability. I'm going for kind of a 60s look, so I'm kind of nervous. So one such period of stability was with Edward IV, who was a Yorkist Plantagenet king. He was kind of what people would look for in a medieval king. He was fit, he got married to a fit wife who was quite below his station, but anyway, sorry for a different time. Had children, he had 2 sons, everything looks good for a bit, until he died of fever, and instead of his sons taking over, and to be fair, his sons were too young to rule at that time, his brother Richard III took over. The inability of monarchs to pass on the crown to their sons is really what characterised the War of the Roses, which is what this big battle was called, because normally if it's a good succession line, things are fairly stable, but because it wasn't, this is what created all this instability, which means that the War of the Roses could really only be over once a line of succession was kept within one family. So Richard came along to, have the crown whilst his sons were growing up, but they didn't manage to grow up because they got murdered, probably definitely by Richard in the Tower of London. Princes in the Tower is quite a famous story, but those were those 2 kings, and this did not do Richard any favours, because now you've just got a load of Yorkists who should be on your side against you, because you've just killed like their son and you've just killed like their nephew. Like, wasn't a great move on his part. Oh my god, I hate it. It's all more purple, and I thought, I'm going to redo. I've been watching Mad Men, so I'm very much into the 60s aesthetics, but I think I'll go for something a bit easier. But anyway, back to our Henry. During this time, he was in Brittany. He was in exile with his uncle called Jasper, who was like always in exile, and Henry and Jasper wasn't the first rebellion that Richard was facing during his reign, but it would be the last because Henry VII famously beat him at the Battle of Boxford's Field. Richard III died on the battlefield and then was buried under a car park in Leicester. So it's often taught that the War of the Roses ended at the Battle of Boxford Fields, but like it was never really ever going to be a battle that ended the War of the Roses, because as I said before, there were periods of stability, there were major battles that had been won, and the Yorkists were winning, then the Lancastrians were winning, and it was going back and forth. The real way that the War of the Roses were ever going to end was through politics, and was through propaganda, and was through creating legitimacy in a way that didn't rely on an army. So the mums got together, the 13-year-old teen mom who's now not a teen mom and is actually a very politically savvy player, our Margaret, our Henry's mum, and Edward IV, the old king's wife, got together and was like, oh, what about if our kids marry, then everything's great, because then you've got a Lancastrian on the throne and then you've got Yorkists on the throne too. Because as I said, the Yorkists were fractured anyway, because it's like, okay, Richard, you're a Yorkist, but like you just killed 2 children and we don't necessarily agree with that. So they get married and they create the nice, beautiful example of propaganda with the Tudor rose. And as you can see, the red rose on the outside is the Lancastrian part and the white rose is Yorkshire. Another politically savvy and smart thing that Henry did was retrospectively call himself king a day before the Battle of Boxford Field, which meant that anyone who was fighting on Richard's side could be done for treason. He was known as a miser king because he had tight control of especially his nobles' money, and he took power away from them by creating bureaucratic systems like a change in how laws were run, and because of this a lot more power went into the hands of an emerging middle class and social mobility was kind of a bit of an option. Obviously not great, it's still not great now, but taking power away from nobles from a right of birth meant that he was more secure and there was less like strong nobles that could come over and take his throne, and it spread out power a very little bit. When it came to his foreign policy, he was more in favour of keeping peace. Again, Britain had been in war for decades in a civil war. That's not great. It's not great to then go to a war and try and like frankly you can't afford it, and it's just not an easy thing to do. So he kept to policies of peace and focus on, and also in keeping peace in Europe it meant that English wool could be sold on the continent for cheaper, which again sort of brings money in and creates more stability. And when things are going well for the country, it's easier to fight off pretenders, which he had to do a lot of. Again, the war didn't end like in one battle, it kept on going. It's just he managed to stop pretenders because frankly there was a bit of stability and he was doing all right. So why was people put their force behind someone else and create more years of war? He had 4 children with his wife, and it seemed to be quite a happy marriage because weirdly he didn't have a mistress, which again you don't tend to find a lot of British monarchs that haven't had a mistress. He had 4 children, 2 girls and 2 boys, a nice heir and a spare, and some girls that could be used in political manoeuvrings because they can go off and get married. And again, passing down your crown to your son was quite a big deal during the War of the Roses. That is basically what the War of the Roses was. People weren't able to do this. I say kings weren't able to do this. So his firstborn son Arthur was groomed to be a king. He really was groomed to be the perfect prince and the perfect king. So all was going great until then he died of English sweating disease. Henry was said to have been absolutely devastated, and even more so when his wife died a year later. And although he loved his wife also represented that Yorkist claim, and frankly everything was sort of crumbling because everything that was being built up to ensure that he could be seen as both a Lancastrian and a Yorkshire king was all falling away. One of his daughters, Margaret, was sent to go and marry the King of Scotland. She wrote to him how homesick she was and he never went to visit her. That was the last time he saw her, was when he gave her away. When he became sick, he allowed only his mother to see him and comfort him, and he died of tuberculosis in 1509. By the time he died, England and the people were just ready for like a proper nepo baby king. They were fed up with someone who was trying to struggle and stay onto power. They just wanted a king, and that guy will be the subject of the next video. So please make sure you follow, give any comments, any suggestions, because I have just started doing this. I appreciate you taking the time to watch it, and have a good day. I've not got lipstick on. See you next time for our episode on Henry VIII.